It's October 1 and the beginning of a new quarter in 2021. Good morning and welcome to Business Morning. I'm Chimezie Obi Iwagu and happy independence to you. Well, Nigeria is 61 years today. Whether in the life of an individual or a nation, many would say Diamond Jubilee is a milestone. Adding one more year is even more consequential, and ideally, therefore, the drums should be rolled out. But for many, there is nothing to celebrate. But I will say there's always something to celebrate, at least for those of us that are alive. We have every reason to thank God, and so I say Happy Independence Day to all of us once again. In the meantime, the President, Muhammadu Buhari, has used the opportunity of Nigeria at 61 to reiterate his administration's commitment to continuous stabilization of the economy by calling for peace, unity, and dialogue. In his broadcast this morning, the President maintains that his administration's economic diversification program remains on course. Let's take a listen.
Also proud and delighted to state that our economic diversification strategy remains on course with a persistent increase in non-oil sector contribution to GDP. We recovered from economic recession in Q4 of 2020 with a GDP growth rate of 0.11% and grew by 0.51% and 5.01% in real terms in the first and second quarters of 2021. The agricultural sector remains key to our economic diversification efforts, as the sector has been a consistent driver of the non-oil sector, contributing 22.35% and 23.78% to the overall GDP in the first and second quarter of 2021. We have seen significant private sector investment in almost all areas of the agricultural value chain, and these have continued even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Fellow Nigerians, this government remains concerned by the significant transportation infrastructure deficit we have. Addressing the challenges our commuters and lorry drivers face on the motorways is still a high priority to us. To complement our budgetary allocations, the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund and the Road Infrastructure Development and Refurbishment Investment Tax Credit Scheme, we recently established a 15 trillion naira infrastructural corporation of Nigeria Limited, which is expected to begin operation by the fourth quarter of this year. We remain confident that our goal of lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years is achievable. Considering the positive impact of our social investment programs, I recently approved an increase in the number of N-Power program beneficiaries from 500,000 to 1 million. Out of this, 510,000 have started the program, while the competitive selection process for onboarding the outstanding 490,000 beneficiaries is in progress. The National Homegrown School Feeding Program is currently being implemented in 35 states of the Federation and the FCT. Over 103,000 women have been engaged and empowered as cooks under the program, while about 10 million pupils are being fed across public primary schools in the country. To grant increased access to credit to the most poor and vulnerable, I have directed an increase in the disbursement of government enterprise and empowerment program loans to an additional 1 million beneficiaries, laying more emphasis on the small-holding farmer through the Farmers' Money Program.
Muhammadu Buhari, Nigeria's president. Well, I have with me here in the studio Dr. Muda Yusuf, the CEO Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, and of course the former Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to look at some of those achievements of this administration, and of course looking at the economy in 61 years. Thank you very much, Dr. Muda.
Thank you,
for being
and
on
happy
the show.
independence.
Happy independence. I mean, we, irrespective of all odds, we have every reason to thank God.
Exactly.
Now, you did listen to the president's broadcast this morning. How impressed were you?
Well, I will say partially because some of the pains that Nigerians are going through did not actually come out very strongly in that speech. Of course, it is good to note the efforts around security. He talked about recruitment of 10,000 policemen, 10,000 to the military, and the progress that has been made. You know, he hinted about the Twitter, that he has directed that it should be, the suspension should be...
At least that one will make a lot of people smile.
Yes, it will be lifted, of course, subject to some conditions.
Conditions, yes.
And I imagine that those conditions are not too difficult to meet. So that, again, is something that one should welcome. But, you know, as we speak, one of the biggest issues that people worry about is around the macroeconomic environment, especially the issue of prices. You know, the issue of the massive depreciation in the currency. You know, the president didn't quite...
Not quite. I don't think he did mention that.
He did not even address it. And I think that for me it's a big omission. Because we need to hear from this speech evidence that
we
the
understand.
Yes.
And we are doing something.
We are doing something, and we are connected to the reality on the ground. You know, that is a major problem. It's not just for individuals, it's also the same for business. Issues around prices. Secondly, the president did say that food crisis was as a result of hoarding. Again, that did not resonate well with me. Because the issue of food is one of the biggest issues that the citizens are worried about. And we all know what the fundamentals are. It's not just about hoarding. Because he talked about the fact that some people are hoarding, that he has given directive that some silos should be resuscitated and so on and so forth. I mean, that does not communicate...
I mean, when you talk about... I wonder who will be hoarding.
No, certainly not, certainly not. So that, again, for me, it doesn't show a very good, effective feedback to the president, first, on how bad the situation is with the citizens, and secondly, about the fundamental drivers of the problem. We all know what the impact of insecurity is on farming, on productivity. We know the impact of logistics. These are fundamental issues. So it's not just about hoarding. I think when we relate or we ascribe the problem of food inflation or food to hoarding, I think it doesn't show proper capturing or understanding of what the problem is. So I think those for me are some, but otherwise, generally, the speech we can say is okay, but you know, Nigerians were expecting some sense of urgency around some things. You know, security, yes, I mean, there are specific mention, but in the economic space, particularly this issue of rising prices, depreciating currency, uncertainty, the volatility, is a major issue which I thought should have also been, you know, reflected in that speech.
All right, Nigeria, of course, is 61 years. And what we recount, you know, some of our achievements, some of our failures, we will keep looking forward and hoping that we would have to channel, we'll try to find a way to channel our energies, our resources, our policies, our thinking towards, yes, we are 61 years, but we are not there yet. How do we begin to move forward? I mean, the president in his speech, he talked about dialogue, he talked about peace, he talked about unity. I mean, and then you have also noted the omissions, particularly as it concerns the economy. We're talking about the currency issue that we're having, and then the rising prices of food. Now, coming from the private sector, perspective, 61 years of independence, where should we be going from here?
Well, we should be dealing with some critical issues affecting the private sector. And we will compartmentalize these issues into the macroeconomic issues, the regulatory issues, to some extent institutional issues, and structural issues. Basically, those are the key areas that we need to address. The president talked about dialogue. Dialogue should not be limited only to those who are fomenting trouble or those who are, creating problems all over the place. Dialogue is also very important in the private sector. That is engaging stakeholders. Because the government or the policymakers cannot understand the economic space, especially the business space, better than those who are in business. We are not seeing enough of dialogue or engagement with stakeholders in the business environment. So that, for me, I think it is a very important thing. Engagement on cross-cutting issues, engagement on sector-specific issues. That will help a lot in shaping the nature of policy and the nature of regulation. Secondly, the macroeconomic environment is still a thorny issue. So far, we are not seeing any clear indication of significant progress or solution. Many of the policymakers are still stuck in their ways, and yet the situation is degenerating. So we need an urgent review, perhaps through engagement, through dialogue that the president mentioned, on the way forward on the macroeconomic environment. And the key issues around this macroeconomic environment are these foreign exchange issues, the depreciation, the volatility that we're experiencing, the high inflation that is going on, the issue of debt and the burden of debt, and all of that. These are very important issues because if you don't get the macroeconomic environment right, there's no way we can fix this economy. And if you don't fix the economy, some of these social problems, even including security problems, in a way are also linked to the economic problems. Because you are talking about unemployment and all of that. These folks are the investors, are the people that will create the jobs. So we are not sufficiently addressing their concerns. So I think we need to address those concerns. Secondly, we need to look at the issue of the regulatory space. The regulatory environment is such that the regulators are too obsessed with revenue. And in the process, they kill investors. They create a major disincentive to investment. And the truth is that if you create a better environment, regulatory environment for investors, invariably more wealth will be created. And the revenue that we seek to achieve will ultimately even get more revenue. But there is this mindset among the regulators and some of the agencies of government that everything is about revenue. And in the process, a lot of businesses have been frustrated. It is bad enough that we have all these structural problems, people are still struggling to make things happen. It's bad enough that we have all these macroeconomic challenges, these uncertainties. When people now get down to even do something on their own, the environment must be right from an institutional perspective. Of course, some of these structural issues, people still struggle, they get generator, they do all sorts of things to fill those gaps. But when you now go to business and you begin to encounter regulatory issues, pressures from different regulators across all levels of government, I think that is something that we need to address. Then, of course, we have the structural issues. Structural issues are typically not short-term issues. We must accept the fact that the government is doing something about it. But a lot more needs to be done. We need to accelerate the process so that the environment, the physical environment in which investors are operating can be a lot better. Because if you have a better physical environment in terms of maybe the power situation, the transport situation, the port situation, and all of these things, I think that will also help to help stabilize this economy. Because we are talking about not having capacity to generate foreign exchange. It is investors that will generate the foreign exchange. If the environment is so difficult, there's no way they can generate the foreign exchange. We are talking about import substitution. Yes, the exchange rate is depreciating every day. This is the time for us to look inwards. But what is the environment that you have created for those in production to be able to produce, to substitute for imports? These things have implications even for our balance of payment position, for our balance of trade position. If you have domestic capacity to be able to produce competitively, that will also help. You know, those are the things that, then of course you have institutional problems. The institutions of government need to be more investment friendly. They need to see the private sector as partners. And this is across all levels, whether local governments, whether state government or federal government. They should see the private sector as partners because we have a common objective to create employment, to generate wealth, to generate revenue. And if the environment is not conducive from an institutional perspective, if there is too much of policy inconsistency, for instance, those kind of things have a way of creating challenges for the economy. Then we also need to ensure that we accelerate some reforms. Already we have taken some steps, and the president made reference to it in his speech around the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act. That is a major step forward. There are also reforms in other areas. There are reforms that we need to put in place to ensure better inflow of private capital, you know, to complement government efforts, especially in the area of infrastructure. We need some policy reforms around that to inspire the confidence of investors. We need reforms around, we have talked about the foreign exchange. There are some reforms that need to take place in that space to ensure a better environment, a more stable foreign exchange regime, you know, public-private partnership and all of that. There's quite a lot of reforms that we need to deal with. So if we were able to do all of that, I think we'll be getting somewhere. But more importantly, let me repeat, engagement is key. We need to engage stakeholders in the private sector. Yeah. The president has talked about dialogue. There should also be dialogue with stakeholders in the economy. That is very key.
I was talking about revenue diversification now, generating revenue from all sources and not just depending on oil money. Recently, they've been talking about the issue of taxation, you know, has come up. Is it just all about, you know, what we get? What about what we can produce? What about harnessing, you know, the resources that we have in the South, in the Southeast, and all of that?
Yeah. Now, there are two angles to diversification. There is diversification within the context of the GDP. There is diversification within the context of revenue generation. At independence and even shortly after, we had diversification both in terms of the GDP and also in terms of revenue. At that time, the non-oil sector was also strong in revenue generation, both domestic revenue and the foreign exchange. That time we had the cocoa, you know, major cash crops. We used to have the groundnut pyramid. You had the rubber plantations in the South. We have cotton. We have quite a number of sources. And that sector was generating very robust revenue. And at that time, too, we must also emphasize that we had a true federal structure, because the structure also supported the initiatives of the regional governments. So they were able on their own to do a lot. They were able to unlock a lot of potentials in their various states. But soon after, up until now, the whole diversification from the point of view of revenue had collapsed. Because both from the foreign exchange earnings perspective and from the Naira generation perspective, we are still now heavily dependent on oil. We are more so from the perspective of foreign exchange earnings than the domestic revenue. So first, in order to effectively drive this revenue generation by the states, we need to take a look at the unitary structure of the government. So that is why the issue of this proper federal structure is important. If we have that, the states will have better leeway. I'm not saying that even if they have that, it will transform immediately. But at least the opportunities and the powers they have will be much better to harness the resources in their domain. Because right now, many of them have excuses that most of the resources in their states, the revenue coming from there, is not coming directly to them, it's going to the federation account. And there's a lot of debate now around issues of equity as to what states are contributing to the account and what they are getting back in terms of allocation. So the central issue of reversing the unitary trend or the unitary structure of the federation is very important. If you're able to do that, then we get the states to do a lot more because they have much bigger control. They have better incentive to attract investors. Because right now, if a state government attracts an investor into his state, whatever revenue that is generated by that investor, or whatever, revenue in terms of either company tax, VAT, maybe royalty, rent and all of that, education tax and all of that, most of it doesn't come to the states. It goes to the federation account where these things are shared. The only thing that the states get is the pay as you earn, which is sometimes, in some states, it can be really peanuts, especially when you have states that are just populated by civil servants. How much are you going to get from that? So we need to address the issue of structure. That is one. Secondly, the states also need to be on their own more creative, because there is this complacency, there is this comfort. You know, some of them are in a comfort zone, that no matter what, something will come from the federation accounts. I think that orientation also needs to change. They need to be more creative. They need to attract, because there is no part of this country that is not blessed one way or the other.
Absolutely.
One form of resources or the other. So it takes the creativity and innovation or innovativeness of the state governments to be able to harness some of these things. We have some states that have quite a lot of properties. Not many of them are talking about how they can generate revenue from some of these properties. You know, maybe because those who build them are also politically influential. There are so many sources. But it takes the ingenuity of the state government. It also takes the partnership between the state governments and the private sector. Because the private sector players are much more creative when it comes to identification of opportunities for revenue. You know, if they have that kind of partnership, then I'm sure the states will be getting somewhere. But right now, we need to address those key issues. Issues of the structure of the federation and the need for the states to be a lot more creative, to be a lot more innovative in terms of, you know, generating revenue and attracting investors to their states.
Now, so far, I mean, a lot of economic analysts believe that there isn't this synergy between the fiscal authority and the monetary authority. Going forward for you, what sort of synergy do you think would you love to see if we must achieve this economic development?
Well, there has to be first a coordinating body for the economy. Because what
Dr.
is
Kojo
operating now?
Iweala used to do that.
Yes, he
The
used to do
Minister of
that. Yes,
Coordination,
he used to be coordinating minister for
Of
the
a-
economy, not just
absolutely.
minister of finance.
Absolutely.
But that is absent now. Because what we are seeing now is people or institutions operating in silos. And we are seeing a lot of territorial tendencies. People feeling that this is my territory and nobody should dictate. You know, whereas they are all working for the same economy. So we cannot allow each of these compartments to be going there in their separate ways. So this is for the presidency to make happen. There has to be a coordinating unit or a coordinating person or a coordinating framework to ensure alignment between not just monetary and fiscal, even some institutions of states, like the regulatory institutions. We talk of customs, we talk of quite a number of key institutions. There must be a framework to get everybody to be on the same page. And there has to be a change in this territorial orientation. People feeling that they have their territories and nobody should encroach. So it takes that kind of structure for us to be able to ensure a proper coordination. Because right now, the finance cannot dictate to CBN. CBN claims that it has autonomy. The customs also claims some form of autonomy. You know, all sorts of issues are like that. So if you have that framework, a coordinating framework, I think it will help the coordination of policies.
Okay, 61 years and counting.
Yeah.
Let's just hope we eventually get it right in all ramifications. Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf, for
Thank
your
you
time.
very much. Thank you.
Yes.